All right, we have a very packed agenda today, so let's go ahead. So welcome everybody to the Semantic Kernel Public Community Office Hours. As always, public forum, so just know that anything said here is done in a public space, but so just be aware of that. But also, right, feel free to raise your hand, leave comments on the chat, give feedback to us, and yeah, happy to divert attention to anything that is pressing on your minds. So as we all know, right, this past week, OpenAI Dev Day, right? So I see in the poll that we just ran, Assistant API is top of mind. Consistent results. I'm seeing Python execution, Python support, Python 128K, referring to the context window. I think that's all super exciting. There's also a bunch of, it's not just the language models too, right? There's DALL-E, there's the new Whisper model. So super exciting stuff to see. And yeah. So as part of it, right, there's a lot of breaking things or things that are happening with the launch of new OpenAI things. So in particular, from the Python side, right, OpenAI made their Python SDK 1.0. So that results in several changes that needs to happen from the semantic kernel side for that to be supported. So I drafted up this initial PR to start that effort. So for people who are Python users, definitely check that out. Feel free to contribute to make it happen. Okay, so one key thing, as we all called out, is this introduction of the assistance API. So I'll actually pass off to Matthew to talk about this, and I think he has maybe a quick little demo that he put together to show off.
Yeah, all righty. So if y'all haven't read the blog post, I highly, highly recommend it for y'all. The Semantic Kernel team had a bit of a knowledge that assistance was coming, and so a lot of the work that we've been doing to prep for V1 has actually also been used to prep for when assistants have arrived as of yesterday, right? What we're doing now is making sure that we can provide a experimental branch or space for you to see the work that we're doing to integrate semantic kernel with assistants. And we believe this is really powerful because I'm sure y'all saw the demos. Assistants basically out of the box do 80–90% of the things that you need these agents to do, right? You don't have to necessarily worry about memory. If you're okay with your functions being run in the cloud, you have code interpreter. There's a ton of really great value of assistants. And so the next question is like, when would I actually use something like semantic kernel? Like, when does it actually come into play? One, we want to make using assistants brain dead easy. So I'll be showing you a POC in a bit of where we're pushing our SDK to make that possible. And we want to be the glue that allows you to start with assistants, be super productive with them. But when the day comes when you want to use a different model, you want to use local plugins, you want to use local models, whatever it might be, if it's something that OpenAI doesn't provide, and there will always be some things that OpenAI doesn't provide, we want you to be able to use semantic kernel to connect those dots, right? So one, make it easy to use assistants. Two, provide gaps that OpenAI has. And then the third one is, because we're in Octo, we're in the office of the CTO, and because we're an open source project, we always want to be pushing semantic kernel forward. We want to be pushing AI, the field, forward. And what's really buzzy right now is allowing agents, or in this case assistants, to talk to each other. Because if you've seen from Autogen, from their research, having agents actually talk to each other allows them to accomplish more, right? It's just like us as humans. One of us can achieve only so much, but when you put us in a group as a team, we can achieve so much more. And so as we push into assistants and agents, we also want to make it really, really easy for you to have these agents talk to each other. And we're going to be taking a slightly different approach than Autogen, so that there's different kinds of ways of orchestrating these agents out in the field, and we can kind of figure out which one actually works best. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, see if there's any questions at a high level, and then I'll love to dive into the work that we have to kind of preview what the SDK will look like with using assistants and having them talk to each other.
We have in the chats, Stefan saying he's very interested in the tools for the assistants.
Yes. Tools are very important. So all the work that folks have been doing with building plugins and functions will help accrue to providing your assistants even more capabilities than what's available out of the box. Okay, so what you see on my screen right here is what we imagine is kind of like the Hello World app using Semantic Kernel in the future. So at the top, standard stuff, we're bringing in our keys, we're getting our models ready. All of this is standard for Semantic Kernel. If you haven't seen the V1 proposals, you'll also see that we're introducing an interface for plugins. That will be a thing. What's new, I'm sharing on my screen, is actually being able to create net new assistants. And if you look at kind of the APIs for creating assistant from OpenAI and what we need from a kernel perspective, there's a ton of overlap, right? You need to be able to provide an AI service. You need to be able to provide the assistant with tools or plugins. And if we go to, what do we have here? The research assistant. You can also provide a template, a instruction set for that particular agent. In this case, we're telling it, hey, you're a researcher that searches web for the information. And so our current proposal, which might change, we might create this as a separate class, is we're being kind of bold and saying, what if an assistant was a kernel, right? And so you could start it up with all of these different things. So behind the scenes, this is an iKernel. And then you'll also notice that it's also an iPlugin, right? We want to be able to afford an assistant to be able to use other assistants. And because in Semantic Kernel, we believe plugins are the best way of expressing extensibility, by making assistants plugins themselves, if we go down to our project manager assistant, you can see when we give it the tools, when we give it the plugins, we aren't giving it just functions to perform Bing queries or to perform math. We're actually giving other assistants. And so what this means is similar to kind of like Autogen, when you start having a conversation with this project manager assistant, it now knows I have a team underneath me. I have people that can help me achieve the user's request. So let's go ahead and see what this application looks like when we run it. So I'll go ahead and hit run, and this thing will get started. We have our standard kind of chat loop, right? We wait for the user input, we read it in, and we add it to the thread. So you'll notice I created a thread up here. If you're not familiar, a thread is kind of this stateful conversation that OpenAI hosts as part of their service that you can add messages to, and then you can run and have an agent or assistant come back with an answer for you. So let's go ahead and add our first user message to the thread. We'll keep it simple, like hello. Now, when I hit enter on hello, this is something simple. This is something that the project manager should be able to answer for themselves, right? So when we hit enter and we have the project manager run the thread, so try to create the next reply to this thread, we can see it does just that. The project manager answers, hey, how can I assist you? Or what's up? What can I do for you? So great. We've shown how you can talk to one assistant using this new semantic kernel SDK. But what's really powerful, what we think is going to be the future of assistants, is being able to use them together. So let's now ask the project manager something it doesn't know how to do. So you'll notice in these plugins, I just given it some other agents, it doesn't have the ability to, say, search the web, right? But it does know that one of its assistants can search the web. So if we look at this research assistant, we've given it the plugin search plugin. And if we look at how we've defined the researcher, we've told it, we've said it has a description that, hey, this is an assistant that searches the web for information. This tells the project manager that I can use this other assistant to accomplish tasks. So we'll go back over here, and now let's ask for something that requires the research assistant. Can you search for good places to eat in Seattle? So we hit enter. The project manager is smart enough to know, actually, I can't answer that myself, so I'm going to be leveraging one of my plugins. I'm going to be leveraging another agent, another assistant to help me. And I've asked, hey, what are some good places to eat in Seattle? The researcher is performing a Bing query, and you can see here it's synthesized that Bing query and pasted it to the console, or in this case, told it to the project manager. They're having a back and forth conversation, right? And now that the project manager is happy with this information, he's like, okay, cool, great. I know of all the great places to eat. I can now present that back to the user. And so here it's sharing an answer to the original question, what are some good places to eat in Seattle, back to the user. So that is our initial demo, and I'd love to just get some feedback on what you think about the interfaces that we're introducing to create different assistants, and how we're using assistants as plugins so that they can work together to solve a user's problem. Okay, stop sharing.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Some different questions in the chat, but I have an initial question is, if an assistant kernel is one type of kernel, what other type of kernels could there be?
So our current kernel, let's take a step back and talk about like what is fundamentally new about the Assistants API. What we have worked with up until today have been stateless APIs from OpenAI, from your local models, what have you, right? You give it some information and it has no context of the past. It just returns back a completion for whatever that thing was, right? With the Assistants API, OpenAI is now providing a service where it does have state, right? With threads, it can actually understand the full conversation and you don't have to manage that, right? With assistants, you can upload files and give them information, some background. That's memory, right? That's state. So again, that's something that you used to have to manage on your own, and now it's sitting in the cloud, right? And so the reason why, what's fundamentally different about what we're calling the assistants kernel and then the previous kernel is just that. The original kernel, which we still believe is valuable, is stateless, right? It uses stateless kind of work, and it just outputs information at you. The assistants kernel, though, because it is attached to the OpenAI assistants APIs, is stateful. Now, the state is managed by OpenAI, but that's what fundamentally makes it different. So we're creating kind of a black and white view of the world. If you need like a stateless kernel, use the OG kernel. If you need something more stateful, that's when you'd use the assistant one. We'll see. Maybe a new way of understanding this information comes about, and we would want to introduce another iKernel. But for right now, that's where we're at.
Very good. Jose asked in the chat, is a thread able to be kept stored somewhere and retrieved?
So the APIs provided by OpenAI do allow you to pull down whatever information composes the thread. That predominantly is, or it's only basically your messages. So they do have a call for getting all of your prior messages from a thread, and messages themselves can also have file attachments, and you can get those. So it's not locked away. You can always get it, but the value is, frankly, you shouldn't have to worry about ever getting these things. You should just be able to call the service and get responses back. And that's actually one of the values that we hope to provide with Semantic Kernel. Today, if you kind of look at under the hood, all the magic that's making that demo work, you do have to make API calls to send a message, do polling to see if the AI has created a new message, grab that new message, give it back to the user, right? We don't want you to have to deal with these raw kind of interactions with the Assistance API. We just want you to be able to have a kernel that you can easily just send requests to and get responses back.
So Daniel asks about how is this approach different from Autogen? So actually, Daniel, stay tuned because I'll be talking about Autogen if we have time towards the end. But there are similar ideas expressed here, so we'll see. Bernardo asks if the state is managed by OpenAI, it is impossible to use Azure OpenAI services instead, right?
So my understanding is Azure OpenAI always will play catch up. So as OpenAI releases a new service, Azure will create an identical service and provide it. So if you are an Azure customer and you have agreements and you like using them, you might have to wait a bit. And if you want early access, you can go ahead and use the OpenAI endpoints.
And then Anthony asks that assuming that state management defaults to OpenAI/threads, can we still use our own custom memory backends?
Yes, and this is, again, another value that we see of Semantic Kernel. I don't think anyone has solved RAG yet to the point where yeah, here's one solution and it rules them all. And I think that goes for OpenAI as well. And so I believe there'll be a period of time where there'll be competing different implementations of memory. So Davis on the call has kernel memory, there's Llama Index, there's the vector databases themselves. And so what we believe is if you use something like Semantic Kernel, you can bring in those additional memory providers as plugins, right? To enrich the already strong capabilities of Assistance, right? You can give Assistance superpowers with plugins.
Very good. I think there's a lot of great other questions in the chat. We will come back to them if we have time, because there's more stuff to cover. Okay, so very good. Thank you, Matthew, for sharing about Assistance and the future of Semantic Kernel. So next, actually, I want to call out Java. So I mentioned in the chat that Java, in addition to Python and C# is the latest language to be supported by Semantic Kernel. And the latest update is that it's now in main. So I have John here. John Oliver is one of the core contributors of the Java Semantic Kernel to talk about it a bit.
Hey. Yeah, I'll just we just merged into main. I think it was late last week. And just like to say, thank you to everyone inside our Java team that helped to get it off the ground and into the Java branch, or into the main branch. So I've been asked about sort of why Java, and as was sort of discussed in the chat here, that we have been thinking about enterprise customers, and Java is one of the largest ecosystems out there for enterprise deployments. And there's a huge number of Java applications and developers out there that I like to find great use cases or going to need to use AI and a tool such as Semantic Kernel inside their application. So I think it's obviously a great target audience for the semantic kernel, and to have a actual implementation written in Java. So the Java implementation itself, we've followed the same API as the .NET side, but we have obviously made it feel like a Java, an actual Java API. So it's does actually, yeah, if you are using it, it will have the feel of a Java API, and one that a Java user will be used to using. So you can go take a look at it inside the main branch. We are under the Java folder there. And we have a number of samples. I also probably should link that we have a number of demo projects that we've written to sort of highlight various aspects. We also had a talk at the DevOps conference that is also on YouTube, that you can go take a look, where we demonstrated a few applications written in the Java semantic kernel. So you can go see how it's used there. In terms of people getting involved, we're absolutely looking for people to make contributions. And would love people to actually use it and actually start sort of filing bugs and telling us where we can make improvements, what enhancements or features you would like to see inside the Java branch. So, yep, give it a try and either file a bug on the GitHub project, or get to us on the Discord Java channel. So I always respond to any messages that are put into there. And if anyone wants to take on any bugs themselves, we have quite a long list of sort of future enhancements we would like to make. So yeah, again, go take a look at our bug tracker and see if there's anything you think you can contribute to. And if you need any sort of further information, again, get on our Discord and give us a shout.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. I'm sure I'm not the only one who will say, yeah, thank you and kudos to the entire Java team, Java semantic kernel community for getting this into main. So super excited to see what comes out of it. All right. Whoops. In the spirit of continuing our series of demos and things, I'm going to invite Eddie Hartman to give a demo around NL to SQL. So Eddie, I will pass off to you.
Hey, you can hear me, you can see me. Presentations, sharing screen, all right?
Can you zoom in a little bit more?
Sure thing. So I know we have a lot to get to today, so I'm going to try and make this really quick. First of all, thanks for letting me present. Thanks for all the work that you guys are doing so far. I'll have a little bit more thanks at the end, but what I want to do really quickly is give a quick overview of the problem space and the architecture of the app that's been developed so far. That'll help lend itself as to why some decisions have been made and how things kind of work. One thing to know is just that this is like a bridge database management application, like we deal with asset management, from the startup company called Mayview Solutions. If you want to zone out for a bit as I'm going for this part, that's all fair and good. But like I said, just want to give a quick overview while we're talking about this. So generally, what you need to know is it's CRUD. Our users are bridge engineers who are generally more familiar with technology than your so-called average user on the internet. And I think that the architecture that this is using is really interesting, so I'd like to share it. So our user are bridge engineers. They're somewhat familiar with SQL, but they're very familiar with Excel. They're not DBAs. They typically have IT problems with updating their apps or their database. And so we wanted to try and solve some of these problems. So we have a web app and an API. What's nice is the web app is written in Blazor WASM, which is all C#, so you can have a shared project that I'm using models and stuff to share between. So I have my models with data annotations with descriptions of the fields, and it's using Entity Framework Core with a base context that gets expanded to each one or extended upon in each one. So it's using Blazor WASM with Mud Blazor for the front end, a library called SQLite WASM Helper, which creates a SQLite database in the browser cache, which is what we run our queries and do our semantic kernel goodness against. It's also using Entity Framework Core with a front-end context, which also automatically manages migrations on startup. It's using it's an installable PWA, which is in the app stores. And since the migrations happen on startup and everything's usable offline, it's really easy to do CI/CD, seamless updates, and everything with this database. That'll all be relevant when I get to some of the discussions about how this is implemented. So the APIs, when the actual semantic kernel stuff comes into play, it's also using SQLite. It's using the Entity Framework Core with a backend context, and also does migrations on startup. So again, easy CI/CD. This is where semantic kernel lives within an API endpoint, which also uses kernel memory. And I have two different parts to this. There's PDF questions where you can ask it questions based on this guidelines that I'll be showing in a minute. And there are data questions, so you can ask questions about the actual database and the data within that itself. With that, I have a schema update tool, which is the YAML file that you provide as context to the kernel in order for it to be able to answer questions and have information about your database schema. And I have a kernel memory update tool, which is used for basically within our database, we have things that I talked about last week, such as state codes, which are numbers that reflect something like one might be Alabama or something like that. And that's not easily representable just within the schema itself. So you have to provide additional context. So we have a RAG pattern that we use for providing additional context based on the question that the user is asking. So this is kind of just like the overarching architecture right now. So this is the PDF that we're kind of working off of. This is all public info. This is, how the US manages their bridge infrastructure. And I just wanted to give an example of one of those. So like, again, I said state code. Here's another one. It's called toll. So if there's a toll, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, or N. These engineers used to do inspections and collect this data based on an old set of guidelines. They changed in 2022, and it's basically a complete revamp. They would have known all of these guidelines like the back of their hand. You can see that this is about a 400-page document. So now they have to learn all of this. So we've provided solutions where they can ask questions to an AI chat and say, hey, what are some like options for this field, or how do I update this field appropriately? And then it also has references to page numbers whenever it answers questions, so that we can go back and double check. But just so that way, when they're out in the field or on a bridge performing an inspection, they can on their phone ask it questions to try and get answers really quickly. But the main one that I'll show is the natural language to SQL stuff. So so what this means is that the users that were familiar with SQL aren't going to be able to do it with the same database schema, because it's all essentially changed. So we also did that for natural language to SQL. So the idea here is it's crucially like what we're solving with natural language to SQL is just asking a question, being able to answer it with data from the database. And it's crucial to understand how the questions might get asked. There's a big difference between someone asking, select bridges from bridges joined on county lookup table where bridge state is 5 and county is 11, where BCL 05 is N. Well, in layman's terms, what I'm asking here is BCL 05, that's toll, where it's N, so I'm looking up bridges where, the bridge doesn't carry a toll road. I'm basically looking for what are the bridges in this county that don't have tolls. So there's a big difference between getting those two types of questions and how the context gets fetched and everything else. So this is what the actual application looks like. This is the basic CRUD, but the main thing we're here to see is the AI chat portion. So I can go in here and ask a question such as, what should a bridge toll field have if the bridge does not have tolls? The bridge doesn't have tolls. The toll field should have a value of N to indicate that the bridge does not carry a toll road and is not a toll bridge. I mean, this is a party trick you guys have seen 100 times with PDF, just, searching context and being able to answer it. What's kind of cooler about this and what we've done is you can also ask questions about the data. And within this PDF, the schema is available if you want to take a look at it, but we are essentially using the same schema. The data has to be formatted in a specific way for like federal submission. And so we can ask it all kinds of other questions, such as saying, show me bridges that do not have tolls. And so this is a basic SQL query. but it's going to come in here and show all of the answers, and I can use names as headers and show like what these fields actually mean. It's getting a lot of information based off of the kernel memory and just the schema architecture that I'm feeding it in with the context in order to answer the question. And so the way that it's answering this question is it's actually providing back a database query that it's going to run. So I'll do another example here. So we can get more and more complicated. Oh, wrong field, put it in the search field instead. So show bridges that do not have tolls, only show their bridge number, toll field, how long they are, and how many elements they contain. And so what's essentially happening here is it's making an AI chat request, and then that's responding back with a specific answer. And you can see here for page numbers and whatnot, this is for the PDF chat, where if I'm giving back references, that's where those references might be coming in from. But here I'm just getting back this SQL query. And this is running this SQL query against a database that I have stored locally in my browser cache via that helper. So like this SQLite WASM helper has a bridge DB that it runs against this, which is why we feel safe being able to do this, because this is like a distributed database. If you make any type of AI chat came back with something that's manipulating data in this field, we would not be worried about it because we can always do server-side validation. And so I have a lot more example queries, but I know we're kind of short on time, so I just want to try to skip to some of the other things. Here's a good example of something that is a challenge. So if you go ahead and say show bridges that do not have tolls made up of concrete elements, only show their bridge number, blah, 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 blah. So this is giving it a lot of context. At a certain point, it kind of becomes overwhelmed. I'm looking forward to using the newer models and seeing like how they handle this larger amount of context. What's essentially happening in the back end here is I have a kernel memory set up where it is doing a similarity search on the actual features that are within the question and what's related to the parameters that I might need, and then providing the top 5 results into the context so that way whenever it formulates the actual SQL query, it can use that data. So it'll know something like if I'm looking for Alabama, maybe its state code is 1, and it can actually generate that query and produce the results. And then we allow the user to do searches, sorting, that sort of thing. If there's results, you can also export the results to Excel and do all that sort of thing if you'd like to as well. So I'd like to talk about just future plans, lesson learned, pain points, future plans. I'd really like to implement writing capabilities in this, so that way you could say update all bridges in Washington County to no longer have tolls, and it'll go ahead and do that. Because again, we can do server-side validation, make sure that all of that data manipulation was done appropriately. So I'm looking forward to that. Moving to assistance for PDF and chat data solutions. I mean, you see what I'm doing here. Now that assistance exists, I have this later as a pain point, but it was a joking pain point that things are moving so fast that it's kind of a fun roller coaster to stay on and keep up. But I'm looking forward to the assistance API and getting all of that. Better analyzing and testing of our logged data. So I'm logging every call response. I'm also doing additional logging where, like, in this case, I got no records found, so it didn't have an error producing the result. This was an example of where the context was too large and it couldn't come up with a meaningful solution. But there are times where it comes back with a query that just can't run. And so we also log that information. I want to do some analytics on that. I'd also love to get this fully working offline. So again, because the architecture is all C# front end and back end, there's a potential of having semantic kernel with some smaller models working that if I'm offline, can I still do some smaller queries or something like that with some interpretation there? That would be really neat to get going. So for lessons learned, I have .NET interactive notebooks for basically doing searching, similarity, and all of the examples are out there. If you're looking to get started with this and you haven't yet, look at all of the examples of .NET interactive notebooks that are out there within the semantic kernel repo. I use them personally for doing things like similarity search to see if I update parameters, how are they working and whatnot. Make sure you log your questions and answers, your inputs and outputs, so we can analyze them later. There's error logging on the server side and on the app side, which is great. Ask your users or internal people who have no idea how this works to just give you a list of questions that they might ask. Once you understand how this works, you are now biased to give questions that are going to work, which is really unfortunate for me. But you know, luckily enough, I was able to ask quite a few people to give me some questions, and they were able to give some great ones that we were able to test with. Have a way to quickly iterate and make small incremental changes. That's one of the reasons why, back to this architecture mentioning, I had the kernel memory update tool and the schema update tool, because I didn't want to do bigger rollouts and then have to have a whole lot of breaking changes. It's much better to do smaller incremental changes. This was also talked about during OpenAI Dev days. So it's definitely something that I had written this script before that, but it is a thing. There are places where in memory, if you want to retrieve a lot of data, just consider using a lookup table instead of like adding context in SQL. That was one of the particular problems I had with counties. There's thousands of counties. That's way too much context to try and load in, just for maybe like one small join or something like that. So have it just use a lookup table instead of providing that via RAG. And keywords are just really important for matching context with the questions and fetching the right data from memories. There's a difference between Washington County and Washington State. So just make sure that like the keywords, whether it's in the questions themselves or the way you're describing the fields, make sure that it just matches up. Pain points. My biggest pain point overall with the entire architecture and everything that's going on right now is Blazor Wasm hot reload. I know that's not for this team, but that's definitely a thing that I wish just worked better. It would definitely take this stack from being like bleeding edge to being like ready for prime time for me, being able to just add components and see that change live. I had in here JSON, but getting JSON mode working with OpenAI would certainly be helpful. I really look forward to that. Getting some kind of testing around this without getting charged extra CI and CD each time, which again, today there was a post about looking for that with prompt flow. So I'll be watching that, but that's definitely something I'd love to hear other people's input on, making sure that as I update parameters and whatnot, that I'm not breaking the other simple queries that had been working before. I've seen that happen a few times. Lastly, I had a few other pain points, but things are moving so fast and getting fixed so quickly that, like I said, I'm just happy to be along for the ride and see how this is going. I just wanted to give a quick thanks to Chris Rickman. John, thanks for your course. I saw that you were in the call today from deeplearning.ai. That was great. Cooking with the semantic kernel. Alex, thanks for the opportunity to present. I have my contact info here. Reach out to me if you have any questions or anything like that. And we are hiring in case you're interested as well. And now I'll open it up to any questions.
Great job, Eddie. No, this is awesome. There are a few questions in the chat. I'm trying to choose one of them. It's not really a question, but Daniel commented that he was using an agent to look at or generate SQL queries that didn't run, and fed the error message back into the context until it healed itself. So I don't know.
Yeah,
if
I know it's not
things.
exactly a question, but for me, I'm looking forward to Chris. I'm waiting for an NL to SQL assistant. So whenever you want to make that and get some retries and things like that in there, we had done some things where we would feed back the error message with telling it to just retry, and it could retry so many times. For what I have now, it's actually working well enough that I'm not doing a lot of retrying and things like that. I'd rather just like log it, figure out what those errors are later, analyze it, and see, okay, what additional context did I need to do? A great example of ones where I had problems where, and I talked about this with Chris, was with my column names for my schema and my semantic kernel memory where I was doing my RAG. I wasn't including the table names whenever I was doing the RAG. So sometimes it would like match up context against something I wasn't actually searching for and rank it higher. And so I made sure I had table name dot column name in the actual descriptions, so that way it would fetch the context more appropriately. But those were, you'll have a couple issues. I feel like the idea of the models will get better, but your code won't, is really important. So I didn't want to over engineer all of the coding aspects of it and let the models improve and try to just give it as much context and information as possible so that way it can do the reasoning.
Very good. Daniel, I saw your hand up, but you put it down.
Yeah,
you want to say something?
One thing that I also did is I created another agent saying this is the data set, what questions you think people would ask about it. So then it would generate like human questions, a bunch of them, and then I could catch the ones that it doesn't turn into SQL well and then just log them somewhere. And these are the bad ones, because like most people are asking similar questions. Of the million possible queries, so that was the idea of agents talking to agents.
Yeah, that's a cool example. I haven't thought of that. What I do have now is users are actually using this, and like I mentioned, I am logging and things. So I want to eventually aggregate all of those. That was what I mentioned in future plans, to kind of aggregate those and set up tests around them, so that way, like the ones that we're seeing frequently that are important to the users are not breaking, because the ones that they're actually using are going to be very different than the ones that I'm giving examples of. Because in my homepage, for example, you can just filter by bridges that have tolls. But these are just simple examples I can present.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Eddie, for showing this off.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work.
Really cool.
Appreciate it.
All right. I'm going to take over the screen again. So this is the week where we have like so many demos or things to go through that we might run out of time. Okay, so I posted on Discord and on YouTube. I'll drop the link in the chat. The prompt flow team, of which Jieting, she is, and others, they're based in China, so this is very late for them. So they're not here to present this, but you can obviously watch it async on your own time. But I'll just call out here, so we can't watch it here for the sake of time, is right. Prompt flow is all about trying to be this like operations layer as you're building your LLM applications, right? It's supposed to seamlessly fit into your semantic kernel development. And right, if you're prototyping, if you're building some things with semantic kernel, well, at some point you're gonna have to test them in a hopefully more scientific way, and to monitor experiments, to deploy, do these sort of like A/B tests, and even just like monitor how it is behaving in the wild. So prompt flow is positioned to kind of provide that. And you'll see in the demo video if you watch it later, but right, a big portion of it is just being able to evaluate, right? Evaluate the chains or the skills or the plugins that you're creating, and saying, okay, based off of some set of like ground truth data that I have, that I've manually sort of collected or annotated, well, what are the how does my model or my application perform doing this? So it's all part of the prompt flow sort of experience. And yeah, I think if you are building any sort of these applications and you're starting to think about production, you'll definitely need to, in some way, right, handle these type of problems. So prompt flow is open source. I think I saw Fabian in chat link the repo. So definitely just check it out. Today, I will say it is more like Python centric. And a lot of the questions I get is like, oh, when is it coming to C# or Java or these other languages? It's on the roadmap for them. So maybe we can get them at a future time to come by and share what that roadmap is. But anyway, check that out. And yes, feel free to send me or on Discord any prompt flow related questions, because the team would love to hear your feedback on it. All right, we have 10 minutes. So I mentioned this earlier, one project, I think pre-OpenAI Dev Day, I think Autogen was certainly positioned as one of the few frameworks that exposed or at least showed off what a like conversational agent experience could look like. And now with assistants kind of coming in, maybe it's a little bit more muddled. But I think Autogen still has a lot of credibility and actually like a lot of value to be had. So John wrote up this blog post, and Devis implemented an initial like version of a integration, like what that could look like. And I'll actually demo that if everything works from my side. So just to see what it looks like. So one piece of sort of like feedback that I've heard for people building anything to do with semantic kernel planners and whatnot, is that they'd like to have some sort of like interactive, like input, right? Where you're talking, you can give the planner maybe some like feedback, and getting the kernel and the planner to incorporate that into the subsequent responses. So with this, I'll show off live demo. Hopefully it works. Actually, no, before I do that, I'll share so what Devis did, and if Devis is on the call, maybe he can hop off, but hop off mute. But really, like, he implemented a new planner, which is the Autogen planner, which has in its components the notion of different personas, right? And there's an assistant, there's this notion of a user or a user proxy. I'd invite you to check out the actual like repo and the paper to understand all these things. But the idea is that if you can spin up multiple agents, right, of which they each have their own set of like personas, maybe their own set of tools and skills, and you get them to talk with one another, then it sort of unlocks a new set of capabilities. It could probably get you better results than if you did otherwise. So Devs, I don't know if you want to say a few words about that, or at least the implementation, maybe.
I think you did a great job. Thank you. So the idea here is basically having multiple agents working together, each agent with a different responsibility. The example is very basic. There is much more you can do combining more agents. Imagine you could have like 10 agents and each agent responsible for something different. So this is just an example, just to give you an idea of the work done by the Autogen team and how it fits into the kernel, into the planner pattern and all of that. So the code works. It's Python code for now, because we don't have Autogen is a Python framework. But as Matthew was describing, we're going to leverage a similar approach in C#, Python, and Java. So this idea of having multiple agents working together is going to be very important. We will provide it across all the languages. If you look at Autogen, I would invite really looking at the white paper they published on Archive. And like the first 3-4 pages, they really give you an idea what they have been doing. They have a lot of examples where the agents are generating code, asking the user to run the code. It makes sense, though. In production, you wouldn't really do that. Like, you're not going to ask your users to run Python code, but it's powerful to see that in action. You can see these agents can generate code, the code works, and you get some work done. We wanted to show a different approach here, where rather than executing code, we want to be very explicit about what agents can do with plugins. So we have a couple of plugins, but it could be 100, and it leverages the OpenAI function calling API, which is, I think, up to 128 functions per API request. So you can define hundreds of plugins, tell your agent, this is what you can do. Like, you can read my emails, you can send emails, you can manage my calendar, you can read files, whatever. You can browse the web, you can buy stuff on Amazon. But for some of these actions, you can also say, I want the user to be in the mix. So this is what they call user proxy. And if you saw the keynote yesterday by OpenAI, they were showing there is a step where the user approves the action, which is really important. Like, you want AI to automate as much as possible, but you want to be in the mix. You want to be in control, what we call human in the loop. So these will keep that in mind. It will show you that you can have multiple agents, initially one user, eventually multiple users. So you can leverage this design in a one-to-one chat, but I think it's going to be much more powerful in a group chat. And you might see that surfacing into Teams and other products. And for sure, there's going to be demos that we provide, like open source implementation, to show you the way so that you can customize it for your own scenarios. I didn't go into the implementation details because it's kind of straightforward. It leverages the SK implementation, but I think from a high level, this idea of working together is the best the best thing moving forward. Like for the next year, I think we're going to all work on these and start maybe leaving prompt engineering a little bit on the side. Like, okay, now we know about prompt engineering, but we want to leverage all that knowledge to do some work. It is still what I call reactive AI, where you talk to AI and AI reacts to you. But I think it will eventually apply also to what I call proactive AI, where you say, I'm going to create a bunch of agents. I'm going to give them a goal, and they will run in the background. For example, let me know when I receive an important email. I'm trying to schedule my vacations, and it could take a week. I'm not going to keep watching my inbox, but AI, please watch it and let me know whenever there is an action to do. AI will reach out to you, ask for questions, and keep moving forward. So you might have these collaborations with AI, where in these demos, you see the collaboration is very real time. Like you want to get the work done in 5 minutes, but you might have tasks that can run for a week or longer. And so you might have, you will start seeing AI running in the background and reaching out to you out of the blue, like you might be working on your presentation, and AI reaches out to you, oh, you got an email. Looks like we need more money for your vacations you're trying to play, or you got a reply from my agent, travel agent. I think over and over we will see those scenarios popping up. It's going to be very interesting to see how different products will implement that. And I think there's going to be a lot of new design ideas, not just from a coding perspective, but actually the user experience might be a little bit different than what we're used to.
Yeah, so in this demo that I have, as Devis mentioned, right, this one's actually very simple, but eventually we'll have more comprehensive ones. But the idea is that if you just initialize even a single like agent, right, and then you can converse with it, well, this is kind of an experience. So if my question is, okay, should I go to Europe or Asia for Christmas? I don't know if you could see this at the very top of my VS Code. It shows that this, it's kind of bad user experience, I'll say, but it's like at the very top, I can provide feedback to the assistant, right? So let's first see like what the worker messaged me. So it's like decision depends on your preferences. Europe and Asia both have unique experiences to offer during Christmas, blah, 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 blah. You can visit these cities. On the other hand, Asia has all this stuff. Very cool. What kind of experience are you looking for? So I'm going to say, like, I want to eat good food. And now the assistant will come back to me saying, okay, if your main priority is to eat good food, right, this is some stuff you can consider for Europe and Asia, and kind of like going back and forth about, okay, these are some of the things you can think about. And you can just keep dialoguing with it. In this case, right, it's more of an open-ended question. I think if you have a closed loop question, right, it will just actually terminate once you've like reached the actual goal. But if I can keep talking, it's like, okay, which area has the best weather? And in terms of the skills I gave it, I did give it like the ability for it to use Bing, as well as kind of be able to read web pages. Whether or not it's using that, maybe this is not the best like question to ask, but I think it shows the idea that, right, these agents can go use the tools that it has, and yeah, be able to come with this sort of more grounded response. And then, well, looks like there's some error. Maybe it can fix itself. Anyway, but I think that hopefully you get the idea, right? This is just kind of the start of what a agentized experience could possibly look like, and you combining with a framework like Autogen, makes a lot of sense. We'll see how all this evolves over time, especially with open AI assistants. So yeah, all that's to say is, well, stay tuned for all that. Yeah, this didn't work. Anyway, hopefully that was good. In terms of, I guess we're at time. I see Chris actually has his hand up. Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, I don't. That was a misclick on applause.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. A big part of all this, in addition to all these great demos, right, we also want to note that this is the period where, if you have feedback on the V1.0 or you have ideas, right, this is now the time to provide that. So yes, I think in each of the blog posts, there's like a link to maybe a discussion board. Obviously, you could just comment on Discord or direct GitHub issues. So yes, if you have ideas, please let us know.
And I check the discussion boards at least once a day. So if you really have a lot of feedback, it's a great place to put it.
Great. All right. And with that, we'll call it a wrap for today's office hours. All right. Thank you, everybody, for dropping by.